Great Wednesday. Welcome to the Fully Human Connections podcast. I'm your host, King, and I'm joined by my co-host, Reggie. How you doing today, Reggie?
Doing well, King. Good to be back after having missed a week last week because I had a pretty dense head cold. So it's good to be back talking with you.
Same here. Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, a couple of things have happened since last time we've actually had a show. But before we get into that, I just want to say, going with our normal routine, what my gratitude moment is. And I'm grateful for my life, my health, my ability to see, hear, walk, talk, stand, run, have sound mind. I'm grateful for the ability to be healthy enough to be able to continue to exercise and take care of my body. I'm grateful for my mother who's alive and has a sound mind. I'm grateful for roof over my head. I'm grateful for the food that I'm able to eat. And I'm grateful for being able to connect with you on the podcast. Appreciate that. You know, it's like as I get older, I really see the value, recognize the value sooner, I would say, more so than be able to have a good conversation with all the noise that goes on in today's world. So I appreciate a good, thoughtful conversation compared to what I normally hear and from folks. And I'm also grateful for, challenges, problems I have in my life so that I can learn from those, grow from those, become more fully human in that process. So how about you? Your screen seems to be frozen there, Reggie, unfortunately. Yeah, your screen's still frozen actually, and can't hear you either. Your voice is choppy.
Okay.
Okay, well, I'll give Reggie some time to get his technical challenges resolved, and we get back to our show. Just want to continue to talk about the importance, I believe, and if you're going to be fully human or on that path, the importance of being able to be grateful. And it's like, hey, there you are.
Oh, because what I've been seeing is both of our screens buffering. I can hear you, but I get the buffering signal. So are we both back now, it seems?
Well, you had just a little stutter there, but yeah, you had frozen on this end.
Okay.
So I went through my gratitude moment. I don't know how much of that you heard, but
no,
I went through my gratitude.
Yeah, I heard your entire gratitude moment, and I was beginning mine when you told me that I was frozen.
Okay.
So why don't you just, if I freeze again, just interrupt right away and tell me that, because it looks okay to me right now.
Well, it looks okay. I'll let you know immediately.
Okay, good. So I'm grateful for technology. I'm really grateful for, my standard gratitude is for indoor plumbing and food in my refrigerator. I'm grateful for health. I was whining a little bit. I had a pretty good head cold last week, and I just was sneezing a lot and congested. And in the overall scheme of things, that's not a big deal, but it affected my functionality. So I'm just grateful to have, reasonably good health on a regular basis, basic needs met, and everything else for me is a bonus. And I concur 100% with you, the gratitude of having good faith conversations with people. But that's what I've been writing about in my Substack newsletter the last 2 weeks has been around conversation and doing more good than harm in conversation. So I'm definitely grateful for us and for anyone who engages in good faith conversation nowadays.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. So with that being said, I'm trying to adjust my camera here a little bit. So forgive me for that. With that being said, what would your spiritual engine number is?
I'm at 10. And I'm wavering between 9 and 10 because the technology thing is driving me crazy. So I have to bring back to 10 because anyway, I'm at a 10. I'm really enthusiastic about our conversation today.
I join you at being a 10 as well. Something else I'm going to add to that what I realized that the challenge, at least for me, is not being a 10, but sustaining 10 throughout the day. And when it's getting out of, when I drop down below 10, being able to be aware of that and then looking at and saying to myself, what can get me back to a 10?
Okay.
And just having that kind of ongoing conversation with myself as I learn more of who I am. And to me, that's where, again, the whole journey of everything we're doing and building on and conversating about is how to become more fully human. And I see that's along those lines for me, is being able to catch myself, be aware. Self-awareness is also, as Stephen R. Covey, as well as Daniel Goleman teaches about emotional intelligence. That's one of the 4 traits. So you see, I'm very talkative. Excited to have the show. So speaking of the show, why don't we go ahead and get into our topic, walk us through what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, so the overarching topic we've been engaging for coming up on 2 years now is Healing America's Narratives, which is a book title, my book from 2022. The subtitle, The Feminine, the Masculine, and Our Collective National Shadow, Becoming More Fully Human. And it's an encompassing look from through the lenses of history, developmental psychology, gender, race, politics, what might be important for us to pay attention to keep the United States of America, and the world at large, but it's focused specifically on the U.S. In a healthier, as we like to say, more fully human and connected relationship with between citizens, among citizens, between the government and the citizens, etc. And so, what I want to look at today, and this was based on some recent research from the combination of the Associated Press and this organization called, the acronym is NORC. It's the National Opinion Research Center at the University of Chicago. It's it's been around for a while, and it does some really good work. So they came out with a report last month, I believe it actually surfaced, and I read a news article summary of it, and I went and looked at it about what Americans as a whole really believe, and where Americans disagree on issues and where they agree. And what really surfaced, and which I think is good news in many ways, and not particularly surprising for those of us who try to pay attention, is that even though that social media and much of the media focuses on what I'll refer to the fringe elements, the extreme left and right, the small number of Republican Congress people who are holding up Congress from getting anything done, the very, very small number of people who are allegedly, wielding wokeness as a weapon, and they do exist, and they do some foolish things, thinking that they're superior to other people. But the vast majority of people don't live in those two worlds. That handful of what they call MAGA Republicans, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, and others, are really a tiny minority. And so I just want to read a couple of pieces that are, right from the research, and then we can get into some of the nuts and bolts and see what that means in terms of healing America's narratives and what we're facing. So these are almost so obvious that I don't want to read them, but I'm going to say them anyway. So most Christians aren't white Christian nationalists who see Donald Trump as a godlike figure. Most college professors aren't trying to silence conservatives or turn kids into liberal activists. They're teaching math, physics, biology, history, and other subjects. Most Republicans don't want to ban all abortions at conception, beginning with conception, and most Democrats don't want to allow abortions until birth. Most people aren't fighting on X, formerly known as Twitter. It turns out the vast majority of Americans never use Twitter, X, whatever it's called now. Most people don't cheer insults on Fox News and MSNBC. It turns out that less than 2% of Americans even watch that. So that being said, some of the statistics around that, when asked how important, and this is from the research now, how important rights and freedoms are to the United States identity, in other words, our freedom and our rights that we enjoy as United States citizens, 91% of Americans across the political spectrum said that rights and freedoms are extremely or somewhat important. All right. Fewer than 9% said they're not important or not too important. So the right to vote, same thing. 91% really value it. The right to freedom of speech, 90% say it's very or somewhat important. 88% said the right to privacy is very or somewhat important. 77% said 54% said the right to keep and bear arms was very or somewhat important. 22% said not so important. So that was the biggest divide, the gun issue. So there's a lot more. I don't want to read statistics at people. There's a lot more there, but I think it's important to understand that what appears on social media and what appears on the more biased media like Fox and MSNBC, Fox to the right, MSNBC to the left, and there's others that are beyond even those two. They report the fringe stuff and the latest stupid thing that somebody said because that gets viewers, and advertisers want viewers. So it comes back to the money thing again, and what drives the larger, especially broadcast journalist companies nowadays, and to a lesser degree, but still to a degree, the print journalism, the online things like the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times and others online. But the vast majority of Americans across the issues, again, and the gun rights thing was probably the most divisive one, where it was 54% were strongly in favor or somewhat in favor, and 20-something% were, didn't think it was an important right to have. They'd be happy if you didn't have guns. And that broke down, as you might imagine, from according to party lines. But a lot of Democrats own guns. They're more willing to give up their guns for the safety of the country than a lot of the Republicans are. So it broke down in very specific ways. But in terms of freedom of the press, freedom of speech, equal rights for everyone, voting rights for everyone, it's 90+% of Americans across political parties say those rights are extremely or somewhat important. You'd never know that if you look at Congress, specifically the House of Representatives, and what's going on because we're following the indictments and trials of the former president. It seems like the United States is at war with itself, and small populations in the country are, extremely divided. It seems the vast majority of folks would like to get up in the morning, go to work, take care of their kids if they have them. If they have neighbors, say hello to their neighbors, come home, have a meal, read or watch television or whatever they happen to do, get their workouts in, and they're not looking to take rights away from each other. So if we truly want to heal our narratives, it's important to remember that people who have the little D after the name for Democrat, or the little R for Republican, or little I for independent, or unaffiliated, and unaffiliated is different from independent, that they're not all like the people who have a different letter than I do aren't my enemy. A couple of them might be, and that most of us really do want the same things in a very, very, very increasingly complex world within the country and outside of our borders as well, because of the role America plays in things like the Ukraine-Russian war and Palestinian, the Hamas-Israeli conflict. So there are some real issues at stake. The country isn't as divided as the media would have us believe. And unfortunately, the Democrats, I'm going to generalize here now, the Democrats or liberals who get more information from MSNBC, and the conservatives or Republicans who watch Fox News or Newsmax, they are led to believe, if that's their only sources, that it's worse than it seems. So I want to put that out there because I think it's important that people do want to see the court system work well. They want the media to be free and accurate and not biased. And they want peace in their lives. They don't want conflict all the time. There are tiny numbers do want conflict because they can make money from it. But most of us don't. So that's where I wanted to start today. It's kind of like good news.
It's not surprising to me, because I understand the game that the media plays. But it's surprising to hear, because I believe most people, again, listen to the media, social media as well, gives you the impression that most people are unaware of those statistics. So they believe the fringes, even though they don't conversate enough among themselves and do a lot enough critical thinking to realize that, like you said, what the news reports on or discuss, what gets the headlines, because everything is driven by clicks, is the extremes, the extreme right, the extreme left, and their opinions, their talking points, and their public figures who are pushing those particular agendas. And so the sad thing about it is that social media has gotten to the point where folks are looking to build a brand, understanding that they want to have the sensationalized headline. Because if I can have this headline that's sensationalized, regardless if it's true or not, but if it's going to get your attention, it's going to get you to click on my show or click on my video or whatever it is, then I've achieved the goal. And it's no longer about providing value, providing good information. So that's where we are. Our culture now is about just content, not what content, not the right content, but just content. And so when you create a culture like that, it's easier to now come in behind that and say, I'm going to give misinformation. You get people talking about these things or focused on these things that are least valuable to them as far as their lives and is concerned. So sharing what you shared as far as how the majority of Americans, Democrats own guns. I know I voted Democrat. I'm a gun owner. I believe, to be honest, my thing is, as long as other people have guns, I'm gonna have guns, and especially people who talk violence and see violence as a way of enacting their justice in their minds. So as long as they're gonna have guns, then I'm gonna have guns. I really don't understand, to be honest, not to get too much down the gun rabbit hole, how creating new gun laws now are going to make a difference, because the criminals already have guns and they're on the streets with guns. So the more laws you make about guns, restrictions or guns inability to purchase, it's just going to make it more difficult for the person who is actually going to follow the law, who's actually going to go through the process of buying a registered gun. Now you make it more difficult for that person to get a gun. And the criminal, the person who wants to do harm, who wants to take advantage of a situation or just inflict harm, has a gun already and can always get access to it regardless of the laws of the past. So I just wanted to make that point without, again, going out of the deep discussion about the gun legislation. But like I said, it gives me hope to let me know that statistics are in line with what I had believed. Like I like to believe that most people, and you just gave me the data that backs it up. So that to me does give me a feeling of a hope. But at the same time, the daily interactions, to just make this point quickly, one of the podcasts that I watch every now and then is Patrick Bet Davis' podcast. I value his opinion. I admire his rise to financial success and what he's done with his money. He's basically built him a network. He sees and he wants to get information out there, his perspective. He wants to build a channel. He's made his money in business long enough. Now he just wants to put out content. And so he had Damon Dash, a rapper, on there who's known for working with Jay-Z, building Rockefeller, and those things, but he's known to be a little talkative and narcissistic and it will talk over you and things. Anyway, my point I'm making is Damon Dash, David kept asking him questions about Puffy. Because Puffy is what's the dominating thing. So here's this mostly business right-centered podcast that talks about those issues and Donald Trump and talks about Democrat, mostly political things. And now interested in talking about Puffy because that's what's popular. And then having a rapper who's not normally the type of guest they would have on a show for that purpose. And even Damon Dash, because he kept asking questions about, Puffy and what was you doing back in those times. And I want to go back to 1996 and Damon Dash, like, you want to talk about that? That was 25 years ago. I want to talk about what I'm doing right now. What I'm doing right now is much more impactful. I'm being a father. I'm going to fight injustice and prison reform. I'm working to do things, and you're not talking about those things. That's, to me, should be more interesting to what I want to talk about. You want to take me back to the past when I was 20 years old, but and Patrick David admitted that, well, it's really because he's trying to tie him to Puffy. And he was like, I didn't go to those parties. I don't know those things. I've been talking to those guys in 15 years. So all that's just to say is even that's the culture, is saying, well, I'm going to abandon my normal base of what my audience wants to hear. And I'm going to now talk about Puff Daddy because that's will get people clicking. As we get different people to my platform, the YouTube algorithm will get that topic and other people, his show and other people's, I would say video library or suggestions of videos to watch because he's talking about Puff Daddy, where he normally wouldn't be talking about that. So all that just to go to say is we even as a society though continue to perpetuate and help get out misinformation and sensationalized headlines ourselves. So it's not just the main media doing it, those corporations, but through social media to be capitalists and only looking for the making the money. I'm gonna just throw out value out the window and I want you watching my video. I want clicks.
Yeah, no, I agreed. I mean, and the article that I was reading from, that was showing the research basically was really clear that it's both the media and social media. So it's all of us and, collectively, not that it's every single human being, but that both, the quote unquote mainstream media, both on the left and the right, and social media are guilty. So what I love, you and I began speaking about how grateful we are for conversation. And so then you just pointed to that conversation on the podcast and how he said, no, that was 25 years ago. Let's talk about what I'm doing now. So he wanted to, he didn't want to do the sensational conversation. He wanted to do the more relevant current conversation. And I think maybe doing more good than harm in conversation might be one of our topics moving forward. We could probably address that for a while. I think it's very important. A case in point, that I'm teaching a course on healing America's narratives locally here in Connecticut, in a branch of the University of Connecticut. This is adult education. And we're going to do our 7th of 10 sessions this Friday. And last week, something that you and I have spoken about, but it's from chapter 9 in the book, where it's entitled Polarized, Woke, and Canceled. Bullied, Woke, and Canceled in the Polarized States of America is the title of the chapter. And so we went into what woke means, what it meant originally, how it's used nowadays, who cancels whom. And I gave them an overview of it. And I so I began, and I think this is worth saying because it's the importance of conversation. There's about 16 people in the class. And I just said, so show of hands, how many of you think woke is a good thing? And how many of you think it's a bad thing? So I just gave them, good ones. Okay, raise your hand, bad. And half the class didn't raise their hands. They didn't want to commit. And two people were really clear, bad. And then there were three women who said good. So I said, all right, now that you've given us your opinion, what is it? Like, what does it mean? What's this thing that you either like or don't like? And so I'm not going to go into all their answers. So what I did was give them a brief history of the word, and the something that's in the book, and you and I have mentioned it. The earliest mention of the word woke, in that context that I could find in the United States was 1931, Leadbelly's song "Scottsboro Boys." After these, I think it was 7 or 9 African-American young men were accused of assaulting a woman and convicted, and then found out they didn't do it. And I forget how long they were in jail, but they ended up being released. They were wrongly accused and convicted. And so Leadbelly's song, Scottsboro Boys, at the end, he talks off the end of the song. And he says, so if you're going down Scottsboro way, make sure you stay woke because it's dangerous down there. That's not verbatim, but that's the first place I could find that the word was used. Now, the idea behind the word, which was to be aware of or attuned to or concerned about social issues, that's been around for a long time, to be awake. But the word, to use the word woke for that, somewhere in the 1930s was the first I could find it. We could, joke, Buddha was the awakened one. Like, he was aware of what was going on. So that's, now granted, he wasn't an American citizen, but that's 2,500 years ago. And so what I invited the class into in conversation, I don't say, well, you're wrong if you disagree with me. I basically say, so my take on it, here's the definition, here's how it was originally used, is that there are healthy versions of it. And I give example. I think John Lewis was woke. Martin Luther King Jr. was woke. Ruth Bader Ginsburg was woke. I named some people like that nobody's going to criticize. And I said, but they didn't go bragging about it or pointing their finger at other people. They just lived it. But then there are people who claim to be woke, and they criticize people, and they basically say, if you don't believe what I say, you're wrong, and you're a racist or you're sexist or whatever it is. So I teased apart what woke meant originally, how it's been weaponized by both the left and the right. And so people began to relax a little bit in the class. And then as part of that session, I also was dealing with some shadow elements, and I point to Donald Trump as the, embodiment of all 9 shadow elements that you and I have been speaking about. And so at the end of the class, a woman who I've spoken with in the past, and she participates and she's engaged in the class. She came up to me and says, "Can I talk to you for a second?" I said, "Yeah." And she said, I don't like that you politicized Donald Trump. So she said, I don't know who I'm going to vote for, but I think it was really unfair that you brought politics into the conversation. She said, because, I think, I understand what you were saying, but I think sometimes woke goes too far with what they try to do. So when she originally said that, and this is what I mean by good faith conversation, in the back of my mind, the part of me that doesn't surface too much anymore, I'm saying, didn't you hear anything I said the whole class? That there's healthy versions and unhealthy versions. So I said to her, well, yeah, that's what I meant by unhealthy wokeness, when they take it too far. And if you don't agree with them, you're wrong, and you're a racist or whatever it happens to be, or sexist or whatever issue is at play. So, it ended up being fine. And she's a woman who's retired now. She spent 40 years working for a federal government agency in the local area. I won't say what it was, an administrative level, not leading it, but somewhere in the middle of it. she has kids and grandkids, and she cares enough to sign up for this class. So I wrote, as I always do, I wrote her an email the next day and said, thanks for bringing that to my attention. I appreciate your passion, blah, 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 blah. And just to be clear, because I don't teach politics, I just show history and psychology. But I said, the reality is that, there's shadow, there's Donald Trump's behavior, and he embodies all 9 traits. I said that, I pointed to the bullet points, and she was able to accept that. So back to, what you and I said at the top of this podcast, the ability and the willingness to be in conversation with someone. And I was in an asymmetrical conversation because I'm the teacher. It's different because it's adult learners. So it's not like I can threaten them to send them to the principal or something, but it's still asymmetrical. They're there to learn based on a syllabus that I present. But we're able to have good faith conversations because I'm committed to that. I set that tone in the class because I speak about skillful means and right speech. Think before you speak. And why are you sharing this with the class? And so there's a trust that's built there. So back to this idea, and that's I apologize for going on about that one example, but to be in a situation where there's trust, there seem to be opposing viewpoints, and people are willing to listen and share, good things can happen.
Yeah. I think that's our human nature is to connect, engage, collaborate, those things. That's why they always feel so good when we do. Like I think that I don't have a data right now to quote to show that part of it, but just from the context of my own experience and understanding and looking at people who, when you actually do something as a team and you solve a problem and you achieve some form of bond through that's creates endorphins, and it creates a feeling of joy and the desire to do it again. Not only do it, do something that, because I believe when you collaborate, you do something for others, something that has a greater cause to it, where you, as opposed to an alliance where it may just be for your own particular agenda, yours and that person's just happen to be in the same objective, so you can have an alliance. But when you do something collectively and collaborate, you're typically doing something that is going to impact more people than just you two. And that feeling, to me, is one of the best. So when you meet individuals who you can now have things in alignment based on principles, not just in common based on same race, same age, same sex, same income, same city, or same country, whatever it is that you believe, well, because we have this in common, we should be able to connect. Usually is not the case. And now politics is so divisive and so relevant that how you respond to if you like Trump or not would dictate how your conversation is going to go with somebody. And we've never were that, divisive. Like, for example, again, going back to that podcast, Damon Dash asked a question. He said, let me ask you, what's a bad leader? Because he always talks about being a boss and working for yourself. And that's his main mantra, has been his main mantra. Where I thought Patrick Bet-David would be in alignment with him because that's what he has done. He's created his own company. He's really a boss and people work for him. And he said, let me ask you this question. If all of the people who follow that leader go to jail, is that leader still a good leader? And Patrick Bet-David was like, well, I don't want to talk about Trump. And he was like, well, I'm not just talking about Trump. I'm just asking you a question. Would you consider to be a person to be a good leader if all the people around him, his family, so to speak, or his employees or whoever his crew, everybody else goes to jail and he doesn't? Can you still technically call that person a good leader? And Patrick Bet-David kept saying, it depends. He would never answer the question. He knew answering the question would indict Trump. And he was like, well, why you keep talking about Trump? And he's like, I'm not talking about Trump. He said, you don't think in my life, and I grew up and watched people, sell drugs and commit crimes, that I haven't seen people whose whole crew have gone to jail and they haven't. I mean, that's a common thing in my world. I'm not just talking about Trump, but the hat fits. But why do you want to answer the question? So right there lets me know that this man who I had admired in certain aspects of his behaviors, such as business acumen, I thought he was fair, but right there, that shows you're not being fair and honest, because you know that if you ask that question, then you're going to turn off half of your listening base.
Hmm.
And that's more important than your integrity at this point, is your subscribers. Instead of just being honest and saying, well, because he's leaning toward Trump. He throws more pro Trump or pro Republican type of uh, theme to his show and topics and slant, and they usually criticize Democrats. So as you talk about the importance of communication and people listening, that's why I'm constantly studying that. Like I said, David Brooks' book on communication that he's written, because I want to improve my communication. Because communication, not particularly listening, is not something we're taught. We're never really taught to listen. We do it instinctively because we can hear, and we now feel that's good enough that a person, I can hear what you're saying, and 9 times out of 10, we're not really understanding what a person is really saying unless you ask questions.
Yeah.
Like I'll give you an example real quick about communications and how to slant and how things really, if you really look at wording, how certain things just don't make sense, but it gets controlled by the media and conversation. So a year or two ago, I attended a meeting in Baltimore City on blacks and Jews, right around when Kanye West was at his height of saying anti-Semitic things, and so they felt they had a need to bring blacks and Jews together to really talk about the issues that we have. And so they invited black leaders and Jewish leaders, and of course, when you do that, you're going to have people come in with different agendas. So, of course, you have people who felt that black folks, the Jewish community, one person even said it, you all left us behind, because you talk about the common things we had as a community, and you all got financially free and accepting a white society, and you all moved on and left us behind. And so that was one of the issue perspectives. But anyway, where I'm going with this is, but when you really begin to understand things and just ask questions, like, what does Jewish mean in that context? When you're saying blacks and Jews. So, because if you study anything about the Torah or the Jewish religion, there's nothing in it that talks about being discriminatory blacks. Everything's about serving, loving, things of that nature. So it's not Jewish and black. Shouldn't be the issue. Number one, then you have a opinion to say, well, we're going to have Christians and blacks. Let's discuss that. It's like, how do we get the Jewish and blacks? The Jewish part is not the issue. It's the fact that you're, to be honest, it's the fact that you're white, and it's a white and black conversation. That's what it really is. At the end of the day, that's where the issue lies. It's not because you're Jewish. And if we meet and have a discussion because we're saying blacks and Jews have issues, we're always going to stay confused and never get any resolution, because blacks and Jews, we don't have an issue. It's individuals who identify themselves as white and Jewish, and now your whiteness is having a problem and my blackness is having a problem. So that's where the issue lies, and we're never going to solve it. So I'm just saying that's the importance I'm learning of communications, to ask questions like, what do you really mean when you say that? Why do we have to approach it from that kind of lens instead of have the honest lens? Because that's where it lies. Because the more I study and listen to rabbis and they talk about their faith and how they live, and I admire that. I want to learn more of that. I look forward to engaging with individuals who believe that, and that's the love of the Jewish faith I'm having as well. So that's why I really hate those kind of conversations being led by folks who don't really understand the importance of communication, because most people are not going to engage in any kind of back and forth conversation to learn. They're going to go and lay out, here's my feelings, here's what I believe, here's how I'm feeling right now. And when you're saying what you're feeling, I'm just waiting patiently to give a chance for my microphone. I'm not listening to anything you're saying.
Mm.
It's just that I just need to get my point across to you because you don't understand. Right. And that's the main thing. And I finally close on this point is, again, going back to the power of words. If you really think about how we use them, if you think about when you say, I understand you, you're saying, I put myself below you. I put myself to the point where I humble myself enough that I no longer think through my ego. I understand you, as opposed to I overstand, right? Where you might say, I stand above you. So when you say I understand, you've really grasped a concept, and you can, to me, shown emotional intelligence and empathy around the energy that you're having with a person when you say, I can understand that. But I don't think most people actually understand. I think most people have awareness, and they can intellectually say, okay, I can see where you're coming from, but they don't feel it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, one of the things, I mean, you just said a lot there, but one thing that really stands out is that idea of saying to someone, after somebody says something to me or to you or to whomever, like the response. So when you said blah, 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 what exactly did you mean by blah? In other words, get really clear on that word or whatever it happens to be, to ask that kind of a question, especially if it's a label or a generalization or, whatever it happens to be. What do you really mean when you say, I hate to go back to this word, woke? Or what do you really mean when you criticize conservatism or liberalism or whatever? It doesn't matter what it is. Because it's like, when any politician says the American people, oh yeah, well, which ones, man? Like, what developmental level, what ethnicity, what race, what income level, living where, and with what history? Come on, nice try, buddy boy.
I don't mean to cut you off, but I just want to make this point real quick. There's this movie out new movie called Civil War.
Yeah.
And I've seen the movie, and there's a scene, and it's on the trailer as well, where the military guy's holding a gun at these folks who are unarmed, and obviously they're in distress because he's holding a gun at them, and he's asking, "So where you all from?" And they said, "We're Americans." And he said, "What kind of Americans?" So right there, you're not expecting to hear that kind of question back when someone says, "I'm an American." So to your point, when based on conservative, based on where people live, they see them. Now we get to the point of seeing the differences in each other, even as Americans. But continue the point.
Yeah. So no, that actually is a great example. But the ability to really get clear, and I always say, especially with labels and generalizations, because effectively in language they're meaningless. Occasionally they're useful. If I'm driving my car and somebody says, "Pay attention, the light is red." That's a good label to have. Because I know, oh, that means I have to stop. But a lot of them aren't that useful. And there's actually research. This is somewhat funny because it sounds like we're complimenting ourselves, but I don't mean it that way. That at the higher levels of adult development, because you can see more possibilities, you can hold more perspectives. Language becomes very slippery, and it's essential to clarify what somebody means. At a more binary, or let's say group-centric version of adult development, when somebody says, liberal or conservative, they know exactly what it means. If they use it, whether they're using it as a compliment or an insult, they know what it means. But there's a lot of massage room with both of those generalizations. And it's really important just to get clear. So going back to what you said, I think it's one of the most important simple questions to ask in conversation, and again, asked in good faith.
Right.
Right. So here's an example of it in not in good faith. What do you mean by that? Okay, that's not in good faith. That's an insult. That's a conflict generator. But if you say, when you said liberal just then, what exactly does that mean to you? Because I can think of 5 ways to interpret it, and I want to be on the same page. Whole different conversation. Yeah. And that's just so far. The closest thing we have to that in mainstream media is I forget the guy's name from the Washington Post now. It used to be Brooks and Shields on the PBS NewsHour, where at the end of the show, the news anchor would give them, a question they would both answer. And, David Brooks leans a little bit more conservatively, and his counterpart always leans a little bit more liberally, although Brooks has gradually been moving closer and closer to the center in many ways over the last 10 or 15 years. But they actually have real conversations. Now, their response is typically generated towards the news anchor, but they have the time to be thoughtful and to clarify their language. And that appears almost nowhere else. I'm going to say almost because there might be other places in mainstream media that it does appear. But they get to be articulate. The other guy is I think the Washington editor for the New York Post. He's an African-American gentleman, but I forget his name. But it's Brooks and him.
I know you're talking about, yeah.
But they're both great. And even when they disagree with respect and with clarity. And ironically, they seem to be disagreeing less and less. They really do seem to be. So
the Fringe will push you to the point where you have to say, you have to tell folks that I'm not that much to that point. I have some liberal thoughts, but I'm not liberal like to that extent. Or I'm not. I may have conservative thoughts, but I'm not a mega Republican. You try to make sure you let someone know, because that really is communicating. You have that mega hat, you don't have to say anything else. You come into a room with that mega hat on, it communicates everything.
Yeah.
Just as it would be if you come in the room with the Black Lives Matter shirt on, right? It just communicates everything. It right there lets everyone know it makes people believe they know where you're coming from. Yeah. And they're able to judge you and box you and put you in a particular area. So now they can be prejudiced towards you. Yeah. One of the things that I found to be, I wanted to make this point earlier too, when we talked about the woke word, and I was thinking about how that's really been in the community ever since I've been a child. My community using that term woke. Now, we didn't usually say woke in the context of the actual word woke, but the phrase, what it means, it was conscious. I mean, that's the term we use, right? You saying I'm conscious. Are you conscious? And again, that means woke if you're conscious. So then, like you said, it gets weaponized to the point where now people will try to get people canceled because they don't feel this person's woke enough.
Right.
So now I'm gonna judge you, and then I'm gonna actually hold up the woke measuring stick as though they are in a position to do that. It's like, who are you to do that? Because at the end of the day, which we're really looking for, if you look at it from a black and white perspective, is don't talk about being woke, be woke.
That's it.
That's it. Yeah. If you behave in that manner, you don't have to say it. Yeah. It shows. Like, I give you an example of folks who I really admire, who I believe who are white, and I look at it and say, I don't feel any sense of energy related to them having any kind of racial bias at all. Like, if they came out and maybe even said the N-word because they were in some reference or whatever the case may be, I wouldn't say this person should be canceled.
Mm.
They use the N word one time in that context, and so it's like they have a body of behaviors that show this person is a fair person, is an honest person, like Marlon Brando.
Mm.
I mean, Marlon Brando, to me, when you willing to, and that's videos now of him, I had read about it, but there's now videos on YouTube where he's actually speaking at a free Bobby Seale rally.
Mm.
He talks about how white folks should be more inclined to support and be there and be active. And I know that he's donating money to the Black Panther Party. And of course, he, sent a Native American woman to receive the Oscar, for his most iconic role of his life.
Yeah.
You know, so that to me shows that's somebody operating on a different level. He doesn't just identify and as being a white man who most considered to be one of the best actors ever. He considered himself as a human being, and he saw others as human beings as well. So he saw an injustice. He didn't mind sacrificing his brand, so to speak. Everything he now is about your brand.
Yeah.
Build your own personal brand. He didn't mind if his brand got damaged, because of those actions. It's like, if you love me, you'll still love me behind this. And if not, I don't care. I never want your love anyway.
Yeah. 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 And that's a great example. I mean, one of, this will be a really quick one. So, one of my heroes growing up, and still is in many ways, Chris Christopherson, who I first found out about when I was 16 years old, right when his music began being sung by other people, and he went out touring. And and primarily he was considered a country artist when he first began. He was a Rhodes Scholar and a Golden Gloves boxer and Army Ranger, helicopter pilot who volunteered for Vietnam but wasn't sent. But he's considered a country artist. And then he wrote an album called Third World Warrior, which was about American involvement in El Salvador and Nicaragua in the 80s under Reagan and Bush. Bush won. And he was asked once, which was against everything that, because country music back then was just, cowboys and flag waving. It's changed a lot in recent decades. And he basically said, somebody said, does it affect the number of people who show up at your concerts? He said, no. He goes, my audience has always been pretty, conscious and awake. And, if there's anybody missing, I haven't noticed it. But, I'm not going to change who I am because they think that killing people in El Salvador and Nicaragua is okay. He said. So, yeah, there are good people, good examples like that out there for sure. Brando and Christopherson, to use the word, were both woke, but they didn't go around pointing fingers at other people. They just lived it.
Jane Fonda as well, another example. Yeah. Someone who put their actions behind what they saw in injustice, And it's not to say the folks who didn't do it, but my point is they didn't talk about it.
Yeah.
They're examples of it.
But I actually I appreciate Jane Fonda even more because when she stood up against Vietnam, she didn't do it particularly skillfully because she really insulted a bunch of 18, 19, and 20-year-olds who were drafted and didn't want to be there. And she really came out against the troops. And I don't know how old she was. She may be in her 30s or 40s, where she actually apologized for that. She made it really clear that she was against what the United States was doing there, but that she had overstepped in including all of the soldiers and Marines and sailors and pilots as being bad people. So that was two steps of being woke. One was protesting the war and putting her career at risk, and then saying, and I didn't do it really skillfully, when I criticized the troops as I did. So yeah, another good example. And there's lots of good examples. The thing is, we don't think of them because they don't go saying, look at me. They just do it.
Right. And they don't get talked about much. Their actions don't get talked about much in mainstream media either. Those examples of folks who are actually doing something that's helping others and really, serving, living up to that serving purpose in life, they don't get talked about as much.
Yeah.
But we get hours and hours of Donald Trump. Hours, even when he wasn't president. Trump, he didn't just get to the point where he gets mentioned in the news cycle. He dominates the news cycle. Like, you are the content creation. But as we get near the end of our show, and then in an hour, we want to also give folks some hope as far as some steps that they can now begin to be more, I would say, critical thinkers. But how would you describe what steps can they be and put themselves in to be less skewed by that media that's out there now?
Yeah, so something that I'm pretty sure I've said this before, but it's like the preacher who keeps on repeating the same homily, and the congregation says, "Look, we hear that every other month. When are you going to stop like saying the same thing?" He goes, "Well, when you start listening and changing your behavior, that's when I'll change my homily." So what, look for different news sources. I'm not saying don't listen to or read the one you typically do, but look for different sources and look for real research. There are some, there's things like the Quinnipiac University, and I think ABC has a polling thing to do together. I may get that wrong. The Associated Press and this National Opinion Research Center at the University of Chicago. These are legit research places. They do real research. And there are some others. The Pew Research Fund is another one. Look at the research. Don't just take some journalists, especially some left or right-leaning corporation, who cherry picks research statistics and gives you the ones that serve their view. And a lot of them do that. Statistics can be made to say whatever you want it to be made to say, especially if you cherry pick them. So do a little bit more work. And I hate to say it, I don't hate to say it, I'm happy to say it. If you're relying on social media as your source of news, stop doing that. Find places where there are professional journalists. Not all of the mainstream media is fake news. It's really not. You have to differentiate between what's a news story and what's news commentary. Those are two different things. A journalistic story tells you what happened, who did it, who's involved, when it happened, where it happened. And maybe if there are consequences, you can point to the consequences. They don't tell you their opinion about it. They report the news. Commentators give you their view of the news. You don't need a commentator to tell you how to understand the news. You can do that yourself. So news sources is one. And then in conversation, when somebody says something and you're not sure what they mean, ask them what they mean. What do you mean when you say liberal or conservative or woke or canceled or whatever? Ask the question, not in an accusatory way, not like, what do you mean? What are you, stupid? That doesn't help. But ask, so when you say democratic principles, what do you really mean by that? What are those? And then we can have a conversation. So those two things: vary your news sources, differentiate commentary from journalism, and be curious in conversation. Ask good questions to clarify language.
I think those are excellent words of wisdom that people should look at and adhere to. Also, just want to add one thing as well, and that is seek to be growth-minded as well. So, listen with the intent to learn. That's such a powerful thing that what you can get from somebody if you really learn to listen to them. There's some jewels out there. There's some blessings out there. But if we're driven by our ego constantly in our minds is always saying me, what's in it for me, we're going to be out of tune to receive those nuggets of information, words of wisdom. So now we're at the end of our show, and I want to now give us both an opportunity to talk about somebody who we feel is actually living these fully human characteristics that we aspire to be, that we can admire and look at their lives as a blueprint to it, putting ourselves on that same path. So, would you like to go first, Reggie, and share who you?
No. It's actually funny because 2 weeks ago when we began this, somebody came to mind at the end, and I said, I have to use that person next time. I have no memory of who it was. Zero memory of who it was.
Well,
You have somebody in mind?
I do.
Oh, go ahead. You go first.
I'm gonna cheat a little bit and mention Jane Fonda. I've never said Jane Fonda before, I don't think.
No.
And I'm going to mention her because I really believe that she is a person that has shown that, and that's somebody who really didn't have to. That's the part that's really so impressive. It's the fact coming from her father being Ted Turner. No, I'm sorry, her father being who he was, Henry Fonda, and her husband being Ted Turner. For years, she was always around wealth and influence and privilege. And she was even willing to use her not only financial capital, but her social capital. Like, she had several different parties, again, for the Black Panther Party, to raise money for friend Huey P. Newton, friend Bobby Seale, pushing her, I would say, using her connections and social capital to go with what she felt was how to go about fighting injustice. And that, to me, is somebody who, and that's putting everything on the line, because you could be, especially, during those times, you could be blackballed, and canceled, as we say now. You could have been canceled, and canceled back then was much more harder to get around, especially if you're going to be a woman. If you're, again, you're not a white male who's rich, if you get canceled, it's hard to be able to come back from that, and so she, to me, is somebody who I feel is fully human, and she just came to mind during our conversation, but I felt that I want to give her flowers as well.
Yeah, beautiful. I love that. So I'm going to mention someone that not the person that I can't remember. I still can't remember. But next Friday, I'm going down to the high school I graduated from, Sacred Heart High School in Yonkers, New York, and where I coached basketball for 13 years. And they have their Hall of Fame dinner. And I'm going to induct one of my former players, a guy by the name of Sam Bird, Byrd, who played 4 years of varsity from 84 through 88. Started on the varsity, and this is playing in a New York City Catholic school league, so it was, a competitive league. He's the career scoring leader to ever play at the school. He scored 1,632 points, and so he's been inducted. And over the past month or so, I've had some phone conversations with him just to catch up. And he has, twin sons. They're 22 years old. And he's just he was very mature when he walked in the building for the first time when he was 14 years old. He was probably just about 5'11", 6 foot, and a pretty big, strong body. He was probably back then 165, 170. And he ended up being about 6'2". But he was a good student. He got awards. Besides being a student athlete, when he graduated, he got awards in religion and for citizenship in the school. So just a really grounded guy. And I could tell stories, which I won't do right now. But I'm going to put Sam out there. He's living down in North Carolina now. He'll be, coming up next Friday. I'll get to see him for the first time. I saw him play in college, where he scored 1,000 points as well. But I haven't seen him since the early 90s. And so it's going to be just good to see. I remember him as a kid. So I'm going to say Sam Bird, because he just was grounded. He said what he's most proudest of from his time at the high school was the relationships he had there with adults in the larger community around the school. And what he's proudest of in the biggest picture is being a father with his two sons. So he has stayed on the path that he was by far the most mature freshman student athlete I ever met. And I had some really good guys. but he stood out. So Sam Bird, who will probably never hear this, unless I force it on him, he's my fully human example for today.
All right, excellent, excellent. Maybe one of these days I'll get to meet Sam or continue to learn about Sam. I love learning about people who are living up to these characteristics. We've reached the end of our show, and I want to thank everyone who's listened to the show. Again, thank you, Reggie, for continuing to, live the fully human behavior characteristics that I'm continuing to be a teacher. I'm a coach. I'm learning, and every show I get more information and helps me become more, I would say, helps me on my path of becoming more fully human. And I appreciate that. And I want to thank our listening audience for listening, for those who are listening and sharing. And if you'd like to connect with us, YouTube and LinkedIn and Facebook as well. Your comments, let's engage. And let's all continue to look for ways that we all can still put us on the path to become more fully human. Thank you.